Hello and welcome to the second MyTo Do List app script tutorial video. In this video we'll be making a function called move to top and a UI to put the function in. Before you get started, make sure to arrange your browser windows in the same way that you did in the first video. Use yours from last week, or if you had trouble or gave up or whatever, you can always just copy the file provided in the description below. This video is based on the idea of learning by mimicking, so even when you don't really understand what's going on, I assure you you will soon, so just copy me, even if it's only by faith. The reason being is that I've also included a Cliff's Notes version of this video. So once you make it through this one, you can repeat the process by making another copy of the initial file in the description and starting over again and repeating it. In fact, I'd really recommend that you do that because at that point you're going to have an understanding and a feel for the code that you otherwise wouldn't have even come close to. So on that note, let's get started with our function. Let's open our script editor. See, this is a copy, so it's going to show up as copy of consolidate instead of consolidate. Let's rename this just MyTo Do List functions. And I'm going to click run so that I can get these authorizations. So we're going to breeze through making our UA, or our UI. UA is urinary analysis. UI is user interface, and that's what we actually want. So I created a new tab, and I'm going to be going to developers.google.com, and actually developers.google.com/apps script /reference. That's where we want to go. So you will never be disappointed with the amount of information in this. This is the end-all be-all of our app script references. And once you actually know what the hell they're talking about, this resource will make these videos completely obsolete, and you can do these codes on your own. Of course, we all need our handheld when we first start, so that's what I'm here for. And let's click on dialogues and sidebars. So let's click on custom sidebars, and let's just get this code that creates a menu and a sidebar when you open the spreadsheet. So I will copy this, and I will come over here to my to-do list functions. I'm going to open up this on edit page. You might remember this from last week. This is where we called our consolidate to to list function, which happens every time you edit something. So that's a default trigger function, and there's also a default trigger function in Google Apps Script that's called onOpen. So if you notice, I just pasted that code in the top. So onOpen runs every time you open or refresh the spreadsheet, which is awesome. So let's rename our menu so it doesn't say custom menu in that menu bar, but instead it'll say MyTo Do List. And then where it says My Custom Sidebar, let's make that say MyTo Do List Functions. It says right here, create HTML output from file page. So this is where you're going to put all of your elements like buttons and whatnot. So let's rename this sheet onOpen. So I just clicked on that down arrow and then clicked on rename. And I'm just going to make this say onOpen just because I feel like it's a little more accurate. It doesn't matter, but I'm going to click OK. So that saved us and renamed it. So now I'm going to come up here to File, and I'm going to go New HTML file, and I'm going to create that HTML file page. So now this is the page.html that will be called from this create HTML output from file page. So if you go back in this tab here to your custom sidebars, you'll see that page.html has a little snippet that we can use to start out with too. So I'm going to highlight that, copy it, come in here to this line. I'm going to add an extra line before our button happens so that it's not right at the top left corner of our sidebar by creating a line break in there like that. So then I'm going to create a new line, and it's not giving me the paste command, so I'm going to do Command V, and that gives me my button. So right now the button is going to say close because that's what it's telling it to do, host.close. But instead I want to do move to top. And then over here, instead of .host.close, what I want to type is .run, and then the name of the function that we want to run. And we haven't created it yet, but we're going to name it move to top. So let's save our HTML page. And just so that we can see our new custom sidebars and everything, let's go over to our spreadsheet, highlight the address, and press return so that it starts it again. It looks like that it hasn't refreshed it because our script is still open, so let me try Command R instead. Now that did it because it closed our script. So now this is opening our spreadsheet again. So it's launching our onOpen function. It says it's working. I don't think our UI shows up the first time, our sidebar shows up the first time, because we need to give it permissions with this one. If you haven't done your, or if you're using this from last week, you should be fine. So My To Do List shows up, it's the menu. So let's just click Show Sidebar, and it'll say authorization required. So I'll click Continue, and I'll click Accept. Accept. Now we have our handy little user interface here. So let's open up our script editor again. And I think I might have just remembered that the reason we didn't have the sidebar on onOpen, let's go to our onOpen here. That's why, it's because it's not called in our onOpen. See, show sidebar is the function that we need to actually call our sidebar. So I'm going to highlight that and copy it, and then I'm going to make that function run when the program opens. So then our sidebar just shows up. So I'm going to save that, and now when our I'm going to put a semicolon and save it. So now when our spreadsheet opens, sidebar runs. Yay! Okay, so let's get cracking on that move to top function. So I'm going to give us a bunch of white space because I've got such a small window to work in here, but you don't. So, all right, so let's create the function move to top, and then give it a left curly brace, a right curly brace, oops, click to the right, and press return so that we have the correct indentation. So what we need to do now is we need to create variables that refer to this spreadsheet, this sheet within the spreadsheet, and this range here within the sheet. So we do that by first creating the variable SS, which stands for spreadsheet, and setting it equal to spreadsheet app dot get active spreadsheet. Next, we need to create the variable sheet and set it equal to ss.get sheet by name, and then the name of the sheet was sheet 1. So let's put 2 double quotes, and within them let's do sheet 1. All right. The next variable we need to create is range, which will be the range of our to-do list, and that's going to be sheet.getRange. And let's do string A1 notation. Let's do double quotes, and then what was that range? Let's see here. It's A2 through A11. So we'll go A2, A11. All right, so the next variables we need are the top row of our to-do list range, the bottom row of our to-do list range. We'll also need the top row of the selected cells that we're going to be doing this function on, and the bottom row. So let me move this guy out of the way. First, let's create our top row of the range by saying range row equals range dot get row. Let's create another variable range last, which will get the last row of our to-do list range dot get last. Next, we want to get the column of our range, so we'll do variable range column equals range dot get column. Now let's create a variable for the cells that we select to use this move to top function on. So we'll call it cell, and then we'll set it equal to sheet dot get active range. Next, we will create a variable for the top row of the cell. So we'll do cell row. We'll set that equal to cell dot get row. We'll do the same where we get the last row. We'll do cell last, and we'll set that equal to cell dot get last row. Our final cell variable here is going to be variable cell column, or cell call, excuse me. And we'll set that equal to cell dot get column. So the next variable that we need is going to be the values within our range here, our to-do list range. So we'll create the variable range vals, and we're going to set that equal to range dot get values. Now, what is range vals exactly? Let's figure it out. So type logger dot log, and then replace data with range vals. Let's save our code, click our drop-down list, and pick our variable or our function we want. And then let's click run. So let's go to view here and logs. And instead of clicking it, let's just look at this here. So command enter. We're going to be using the logger all the time. So instead of going to that view all the time, let's just do command return. So these are our range values here. We've got eat, breakfast, run, shower, homework, and then empty, 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 empty. So we've got eat, breakfast, run, shower, homework, empty, 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 empty. So that's what our range vals is. Another thing that we want this function to operate on are the underlines and the bolds that we use, because when we move things, we want the underlines and bolds to move with them. So if breakfast was bolded and shower was underlined, if we moved these, cells with this function and we didn't tell the script to actually move the underlines and bolds as well, then after say breakfast moved to the top, then run would be bolded instead and it would be confusing. So we'll create a variable called range lines and we'll set that equal to range dot get font lines. We'll also create a variable range bolds and we'll set it equal to range dot get font weights. Okay, so now our code is starting to get interesting. The next thing we need to do is cut out the empty cells from our array. So we want our array to be just homework through eat, not empty, 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 homework through eat. So the way to do that is to create a for loop here. And then before we do that, click to the right of range vals here and let's create a variable range vals length, which will refer to the length of our range vals array. So we'll do range vals dot length. Okay, so back in our for loop, let's create the variable I equals 0, semicolon, and then we'll do while I is less than range vals length, semicolon, and then we'll do I plus plus. So I starts at 0, and while I is less than range vals length, increment I upwards 1 by 1, each time looping this piece of code between the curly braces. What do we want inside of our loop? Well, let's make it an if statement that goes if, let's go 1 by 1 down this list, and if the value of the cell is nothing, then stop the loop on that number. So let's create the variable instance and set it equal to range vals I 0. Now why did I do I 0? Well, range vals I is going to be when I is 0. Range vals I is just going to be eat within square brackets. Range vals I 0 is going to be just the word eat, which is important for the rest of our if statement here. So let's create our if statement. We'll do if, and then in parentheses we'll do instance. If instance is equal to double quotes or null, then break. That's the command to stop the function, or to stop the loop. So what are we doing that for? Well, it seems like a really redundant and not useful thing, but let's log, before we break, let's log I. Put those semicolons in there. So let's run our function and see what happens here. It logs 5. So what is it logging here? We've got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, stop on 5. So now what this does is it gives us the location of where we want to split our range vals array and where we want to take off, where we want to start taking off empty cells. So let's get rid of that logger. So outside of the for loop, let's create a variable called splice index and set it equal to I. Next, we're going to want to not only splice our range vals, but also our range lines and our range bolds all at this same splice index. So what we're going to want to do for that is create a for loop that goes one by one through each one of those. First, we're going to want to load these three range vals, range lines, and range bolds into its own array. So we'll go variable, what shall we call it? We'll call it range info array equals, and then let's just make an array by putting two square brackets, and within that we'll do range vals, comma, range lines, comma, range bolds. So now we have our array, and it only has these three arrays in it. It's an array full of arrays. So now let's create a for loop by doing for, and in parentheses, let's create the variable j, set it equal to 0, and then we'll say, well, j is less than range info array dot length, and we'll press or type semicolon, and then we'll do j increments upwards, and then within our curly braces, let's write some code. Before we continue on this, I just remembered that we only want this function to run if our selected cells are within our to-dos list. We don't want to have it, if it's over here, we don't want the function to run because it's not part of our to-do list. It won't make sense to the program. Real quick, let's create an if statement that encapsulates this. So we're going to want to write if, and then let's do if the cell row is greater than or equal to the range row, which means if this selected cell row is greater than 2, and using double ampersand, if cell call is the same as range call, now we can do whatever else we have planned and stored for this function. So let's go below our little for loop, and let's put our other curly brace so that we don't get lost. And actually, let's select our for loop here and press tab so that we get it in correct indentation. So let's click to the right of this left curly brace here within our for loop, and let's continue. So let's create a variable for the specific array within our range info array. So let's call it array spec for specific, and then we'll do range info array j. Next, what we want to do, so that's going to refer to which range info array is actually happening at that iteration of the for loop. So we want to splice this array. So we want to go array spec dot splice. Splice is an array method that takes as input the index and how many items you want spliced. So since we already have our splice index figured out, we'll do splice index. Now what are we going to do for how many? Well, how many is going to be range vals.length minus splice index, which is going to be which is going to be that number, and then plus 1. Because if you don't have that plus 1 in there, it's going to cut off this last one here, and you don't want to do that. So just trust me on it. It's going to be range vals length we had a variable for that, right? Minus splice index plus 1. So that's going to be that's what we have in there for how many. Okay, so that's going to splice it, and now let's log our array spec to see how that works. So let's ensure that we have a cell. Yep. So we have a cell within this to-do list range selected, so our function can run. So let's click run, and now let's press command return. Now check it out. It's exactly what we wanted. Eat, breakfast, run, shower, homework. Eat, breakfast, run, shower, homework. And then if you notice, none, 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 underline, none. So for as far as underlines, we've got none, 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 underline. Awesome. So that works exactly how we want it. Now what we need to do, let's look at this again. Now what we need to do, see how we've got shower selected? We want to move shower to the front so that it's shower, eat, breakfast, run, homework. Shower, eat, breakfast, run, homework. So what we want to do is we want to create a function that splices this guy out and concatenates it on the front. So let's write a separate function for that, because all of this code that we've written right here so far, we can actually use with all of our other move functions, move up, move down, and move to bottom. So then we won't have to type all of this crap again. So we'll name it top function, and while we're still in this function, let's just call it. This is called calling a function. So we'll do top function. That's going to call top function from inside of here. We don't have top function yet, so let's create it. Function top function. And then follow it by empty curly or empty parentheses and your curly braces. Arrow up, arrow over, and press return. So let's just kind of separate this. Let's make this function all by itself by using dummy variables that will then later replace with variables that we use from inside of here. So let's create a variable, a fake dummy variable called array, and let's set it equal to just the first like 10 or so letters of the alphabet. So we'll do A, B, C, D, E, F, and let's stop with G. So just so that we can keep our visuals going here, let's just make a fake little to-do list here next to it. So we'll do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? Sweet. So in our top function here, the next thing we want to create, since we want to splice this array, is we want to create a splice index for it. So just for the sake of simplicity, let's say that we select C and D to operate, hypothetically, to operate this function on. So let's create our index by saying variable index equals, what would that be? We've got 0, 1, 2. So it's going to be variable index is 2. Now, we wanted C and D, so length is going to be, or how many is going to be 2 as well. So let's do variable how many is 2 also. So let's splice this array by doing array dot splice. See how it shows up there? And now look, these are already taking as input our index and our how many. So like, watch, if this said cheese wad here, that's not going to be there's nothing for that, right? But if this index here said cheese wad, then cheese wad shows up there. So the reason we named these variables index and how many was to save ourselves some time. So let's log array and see what happened here. Logger.log. And then let's write array in here. So we want to save our code, and then we want to select top function from our dropdown, and we want to run top function. Then we want to press command return, and now look, we've got A, B, E, F, G. So it spliced our C and D out, which is exactly what we want. Our C and D is the product is what's returned by doing this. What I mean by that is let's turn this array.splice into its own variable. So we'll call it array splice. And then let's log array splice so we can see what's going on there. Let's run it. Command return. Now you see there's our C and D. So it changes, the splice changes the original array to be everything except what got spliced. And what it returns as its own variable are those two items that got spliced out. So what we need to do next is we need to concatenate our array onto the end of our spliced, right? Because we're moving them to the front. So what we want to do is let's just create another variable, and we'll call it array back, because it's going to be the array that we send back to our other function. And we will concatenate array splice dot concat, you see it there. And then we'll type in array here. So that's the concatenate array method. And let's log it to see what it does. We'll type in array back. And then we will run our function and press command return. Now look, we've got C, D, A, B, E, F, G, which is exactly what we want. So, the two details that this dummy function here are missing are our inputs from our main function here, our move to top function, and some way to return what happens in this little function back into our big function here. So what we need to do is we need to actually return array back. Okay, so we'll do return array back. And then we'll follow that by a semicolon, which for some reason is actually necessary. So we'll do command S to save our code. And then here, let's just create another variable. We'll call it from function. And then we'll set that equal to our top function. Now this top function with empty parentheses is actually going to be, once this all runs, is going to be what our array back returns. To prove this, I'm going to log it. Logger.log from function. So I'm going to run this. Oh, that only ran our top function though. So let me click on move to top. And then let's run our move to top function. And then let's do command enter. Now it didn't log anything. Why didn't it log anything? Well, it's because we have cells that are selected outside of our to-do list range. So it didn't meet the requirements of our if statement, and so it didn't even run that code. Let's run this function again and let's see what we get. So it ran 3 times and it gave us the C, D, A, B, E, F, G back, which is great. So now all we need to do is send actual information to this top function instead of using these dummy values here. So what we want to do is we want to add array in here, as an input to top function, and then we just want to get rid of this guy. So up here, what's that going to be coming from in here? That's going to be array spec. Because array spec is our range info array J. So now what that's going to do is it's going to take our range vals and it's going to split to the second one. It's going to split breakfast and run and put them at the front of the list, because right now we have index of 2 and how many of 2. So let's try it. We run our move to top function and then we do command return. Now let's see here. Oh, it did run shower. That's okay. Run shower, eat breakfast, homework. Run shower, eat breakfast, homework. So we want this array to actually do this little function on whatever cells we have selected, right? So instead of the index being 2, we're going to actually want it to be whichever cells are selected in here, right? So let's say we had breakfast through shower selected. So what is this breakfast one here, this top row? Top row is 3, and then the top of the range is 2. So breakfast's actual place within the array is going to be 3 minus 2. It's actually going to be 1, right? So it'll be 0, 1, right? So that'll be our index. Won't be 2, it's going to be cell row from up here, right? Cell row minus range row. So these, since they're black, it shows us that they're not, that they don't exist yet inside of this function. So let's actually put those in here. And I don't know why I put them at the beginning, but I just do. So do it also. So we do range row or cell row, comma, and then we'll do range row, comma. Now let's just go straight to our how many. So if we have breakfast through shower, what are we going to have here? What variables do we have? Well, we've got cell row and then cell last. So cell row is 3, cell last is 5. How do we get that to give us 3? Well, we're going to do cell last minus cell row, but that's only 2. 5 minus 3 is only 2. So we need to do cell last minus cell row plus 1. You're probably just going to have to take this on faith right now, because it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense just by itself. But so we type cell last minus cell row, and as you can see, cell last is black, which means it doesn't exist yet. So let's put that one in there too, right next to our cell row. Cell last, comma. Now it's in there, right? Oh, we needed to do cell last minus cell row plus 1. So right now we only have array, which is the last one. So we want to also add, just on the left here, we want to add cell row. We want to add cell last. We want to add range row. And then array spec is going to be the array that gets passed. So when this info right here gets passed into this, you see anywhere where it says array, it'll actually be array spec here. That's how it works. So let's see if that did what we wanted it to do. Let's click run, and let's click command return. Now check it out. We've got, what do we have selected here? We've got breakfast, run, shower, eat, homework is what it should say. Breakfast, run, shower, eat, homework. It also appears to have moved the underline and the bold as well, just like we want it to. So this is all great, except for that we actually it doesn't do anything yet to our actual spreadsheet. So before we continue by making it actually operate on here, we're going to want to do one last thing, and it's this. When we move breakfast, run, shower up to the top of the list, we're also going to want our selection to move up to the top of the list. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to pass back more information than just the array back into here. We're going to also want to pass all the information necessary to tell this function here which cells we want to select in the end, which will be the top row and then how many down from the top row. So what we want to do here is we want to actually return an array full of information back to our main function. And within that array, we want, of course, the values here, array back, which is the values. Then we're also going to want to pass it back range row, which is the top row of what we want the final selection to be, the final blue square to be. And then we also want to pass it how many. So since we calculated how many already right here, all we have to do is pass back this how many. Let's log our move to top function and see what we get. So we'll run it, it'll save it. Then we do command return. Now check it out. The first thing we sent it was this array. The second thing we sent it was our range row, the top row of our to-do list range. And then the last thing we sent it was how many items to send. So let's select something different here. We'll do breakfast and run. That's only going to be 2, right? So if we run this again, and then we do command return, check it out. It only says 2. That's great. That's exactly what we want. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to create an array within which we can place the 3 different actions of this top function. The first action will operate on range vals, the second will operate on range lines, and the third will operate on range bolds, right? So what we want to do is we want to create an empty array outside of our for loop here. Let's name it changes array. So I'll create a new line and create the variable changes array, and I'll set it equal to empty square brackets. Then in here, what I want to do is I want to push information from this guy right here into here. So we'll do changes array dot push. Now what do I want to put in here? From function. But from function is going to give me that array where the first thing is all of the values, and then the second thing is the range row, and then the third thing is the how many. In this array, I only want it to pass just the values here from vals and lines and bolds. So what I want to do is I want to do 0, because that's just going to give me the first item of that. So let's do a logger.log of changes array, and we'll see what we get from this. So I'm going to run, it'll save the code, and then I'm going to do command return. Now check it out. Here is our first array, here's our second, and here's our third. So the last thing that we need to do in this code is we need to put we need to replace the values that exist here with our newly moved around arrays. So the way we do that is first we need to clear this range right here. We need to clear this whole range. So what we want to do is range dot clear content. You see it there? And then what we want to do is we want to do range offset. range.offset. Now what does range.offset do? Well, range.offset gives our script a new definition of where to put stuff, right? Because our range, you can't just say range.setValues for some reason. So how do we want to offset it? If we don't want it to actually move anywhere, 0, and we don't want the columns to move anywhere, so we want 0. And then what about number of rows? This is the reason we have to use this offset, is we have to tell the script how many rows of info we're going to be putting back in here. And it has to match the number that's in our array. So how many do we want? Well, we want, let's do from function 0.length. From function 0.length. That will give us the length of the array that we're putting back in there, right? So what we'll usually do is we'll usually do .setValues. You see it there? But I don't want to type this 3 times because we're going to have to do set values and then set font lines and then set font bolds. So what I want to do instead is I want to save this guy right here as its own variable, and we'll name it offset. So then what that allows us to do is then we can just go offset dot set values. And then for the values, we want, this changes array is an array full of the 3 arrays that came from our function, which were range vals, range lines, and range bolds. So what we want is changes array, 0 is going to be the values. So then we do offset dot set font lines. You see it there? I'm going to arrow down to it. And then we want it to be changes array 1. And then we want to do offset dot set font bolds. But it's not font bolds, sorry, it's font weights. And then we want to do changes array 2. The last thing we have to do to our code, let's just run it to see. So it's going to be kind of tough to see, but we got breakfast and run, and we want to move breakfast and run to the top. So it's going to be breakfast, run, eat, shower, homework in the end, right? So let's run our code. And look, it says breakfast, run, eat, shower, homework. But you see how if we don't move the selection, it's really confusing. The last thing we need to do is move the selection. So let's create a variable called end selection. And now this is where we access these 2 little guys here that we returned from our mini array. Let's go sheet dot get range, and it'll be the second one here that's got row, column, and number of rows. And then what do we want for our row? Well, we want it to be this guy here, range row, which is from function 1. So we're going to write from function 1. And then column is really for everything we do in this piece of code here. It's always going to be range call. Range call being the column we found for our to-do list range. And then the number of rows is, guess what? It's how many. So how many is from function 0, from function 1, from function 2. So we'll do from function 2. So now we've defined our end selection by getting that range, and now we have to set our range to that. So we want to go sheet dot set active range return. And then we want to do end selection. So we should have a fully functional code. Let's just save it, and let's see if it works with our sidebar. Well, it didn't work with our sidebar. Let's try to invoke this function here. Oh, looks like it worked there. So that means that we just need to refresh this page. So I'm going to do Command R to refresh. So our UI appears, which is great. Let's see if we can select these and then move these two to the top. And it works just fine. So we want to move these three to the top, and they move to the top. Excellent. We've created our finished function. So next week we're going to be adding a few buttons to our UI, namely the move up, the move down, and the move to bottom buttons. Thanks again for watching. Please take a look at the other resources that I've included in the description of this video. Of course, there is the Cliffs Notes version of the video for fast repping and memorization of the code. Also, there's a document that contains the written instructions to this video if you would find that helpful. A third thing is an external resources document which gives links to all of the external resources, that I have found helpful in this process. I've also created a Reddit subgroup so that we can discuss any issues that we have with the code or with me babbling on like a fool. So thanks again for watching. I hope to see you next time.